So I want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us today in what I know are busy days to discuss something that we also know is front and center in the hearts and minds of educators across the country, and that's reading and literacy. Now, this event, which is, as you heard, brought to you by Penguin Random House Education and our new classroom libraries, is a roundtable discussion that will be followed by a Q&A on how dedicated independent reading in conjunction with targeted instructional reading can result in significant gains for every student. But before we get started, I'd like to set the stage with just a little bit of research. Now, regarding independent reading, I'd like you to take a look at the data that was highlighted by Dr. Kylene Beers and Dr. Robert Probst on what happens when you add just 10 minutes of independent reading to a student's school day. Now, from the top down, you see gains. Now, your students with the highest level of word exposure, those that are reading 65 minutes a day outside of school and ranking in the 98th percentile, even those students see a 15% increase in word exposure with just those 10 additional minutes of independent classroom reading. Now, that's actual reading, not just the time it takes to go get a book and sit down, because we know how long that takes. But that's a solid increase for your top students. But look at what happens as we move towards students that need significant increases in word exposure. Now, you see this incremental growth become quite monumental. Now, for those students who are reading less than 5 minutes a day outside of school, adding just 10 minutes of independent reading in the classroom to their school day, you see their word exposure skyrocket. Now, that percentage increase is highlighted here in orange. And if you look at the word exposure of students reading the least outside of school, under 2 minutes a day, their word exposure shoots up 556%, which moves them into and sometimes even above the 70th percentile. And let me remind you, we're only talking about 10 minutes. And what you see here is a significant student gains in exchange for very small incremental change. And imagine what would happen with 15 minutes. Imagine 20 minutes. Now, you also need resources to support your reading initiatives. And this recent survey conducted by the ILA tells us which one. Now, teachers, administrators, literacy consultants, and higher ed professionals all overwhelmingly agreed that if you're going to strengthen any one library, classroom libraries are a key to success. And the National Council of Teachers of English's 2017 statement on classroom libraries actually reinforces this, stating they play a key role in providing access to books and promoting literacy. They have the potential to increase student motivation, engagement, and achievement, and they help students become critical thinkers, analytical readers, and informed citizens. Now, your students not only need time to read, they need the selection and access to enable choice. They need to be engaged, and they need what Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop calls the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors to an understanding of their own and others' experiences. Now, to support school reading and literacy initiatives, because we understand how important those are, Penguin Random House Education has partnered with one of our guests, literacy expert Laura Robb, to create both independent reading and instructional reading libraries. Now, these classroom libraries can be used with any curriculum and support the use of authentic and inclusive texts in any ELA block and across subject areas. You know, classroom libraries are fully flexible. They can be added to existing classroom libraries to revitalize student reading choices, or even be the strong foundation to build a new reading culture. And we're happy to talk more about these libraries in the Q&A, but for now, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's esteemed panelists, here today to discuss the research, the case studies, and how to get started on improving student success with independent reading. Our first panelist, I mentioned earlier, is Laura Robb, a well-known author, teacher, literacy expert, and international speaker. I welcome Laura. Laura, if you want to give a quick wave or hello. Our second panelist and moderator is Dr. Kris Felicello, Superintendent of Schools for North Rockland Central School District. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you, Travis. It's a pleasure to be here today.
And rounding out our panelists is Carol Celani, a literacy specialist and someone I've worked with very closely in the Auburn School District in Maine. Hi, Carol.
Hi, thank you.
Now, all of our panelists have seen firsthand the power of independent reading coupled with authentic, real world books. And I'd like them to thank them for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Felicello. Doctor?
Thank you, Travis. So, what a wonderful product, and so important for us to increase the level of reading. Laura, I have a question for you, and I noticed that our libraries are K through 8 and also into the secondary. But why do you see it as important for our youngest learners to be exposed to a classroom library, in particular pre-K students, K students, particularly when these students at this point in their academic career are unable to read most of that?
Thanks so much, Kris, for asking that question, because the pre-K and K libraries, from my perspective, are the most important libraries. And this picture that's on your screen tells the story really well. The little girl looking through books is 14 months old, and her parents had been reading to her ever since she was born. So what's happening here? She's learning a lot about books. She knows the front and back cover. She knows that we turn the pages from left to right. She's developing what we call concepts of print and emergent literacy skills. If you look at the middle picture, that's Amelia's brother, Liam. He's 4, and he's looking at books all the time and what we call pretend reading. He's telling the story through the picture. He is not yet reading, but Amelia, who is now 6, as you can see, and has just entered kindergarten this year, is reading fluently. However, there are a lot of children that are not exposed to books and surrounded by books the way Amelia and Liam are. You can take down the picture now. But what happens is that when kids enter pre-K with very few literacy skills, it's an opportunity to give them the concepts of print, for them to handle books, to learn from the photographs and the pictures, to know that the print and pictures tell the story. They learn how to point to words. They learn that there are spaces between words and punctuation. We used to call these like pre-reading skills. They're really getting ready to learn how to read. The more exposure they have to books on their own, and the more books that are read to them, the better predictor it is of reading in 1st grade, 3rd grade, and becoming a really strong reader by 5th grade. And Carol, I know that you ordered the pre-K libraries, and I was really thrilled that you did that. Have you had a chance to use any of them, or can you tell us anything about your personal experiences?
Sure. So our school received our classroom libraries by the end of December. And specifically speaking to the pre-K teacher, she started to unpack her books in January with the children present. So one of the very first days, I had written down, one of our little friends walked into the room and her quote was, "It's a book paradise in here." And that day, they all got to look at books. They all got because of the conditions that we're under, they had a set pile on their own little table. But it was just so important for those kids to have their very own pile of books to be able to look at. And at the end of that morning session for pre-K, she even said, instead of choice time with toys tomorrow, can we get new books? So it's vitally important for them to be able to have their hands on these books because they might not have them at home.
You're absolutely right, Carol. The population I've been working with for the last 4 years are children entering 5th and 6th grade, reading on a K-2 level. And we do surveys and we try to find out the background of these children. I would say that 99% of them never go to the public library, do not have books in the house. Some of them have parents who speak different languages, but books and reading have never been a part of their life. And it really has a tremendous impact. And the year I had them, we ordered classroom libraries. And again, it was the same reaction as your little pre-K kids. They felt they were in book heaven, you know, that they had books to choose from, books they were able to read, books they knew they would learn how to read. It's a most exciting thing to watch children respond to that deep, you know, deep within us is that desire to read and communicate.
For me too, as a superintendent, one of my biggest challenges is to get our students to develop that love of learning throughout life. And it's not just about school, or I have to read this textbook, or you know, because somebody's telling me to do it, but develop that love of learning and of reading. And it's always a challenge when the kids get much older. But hearing what Carol said about it's a book paradise in here, you know, that makes me want to run out right now and, you know, get some of those books for my younger learners. It's such a great thing to hear.
It is, Kris, and it is exciting to watch. And when motivation and engagement start way down there, it continues. Nothing can stop it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll do another question.
Sure.
All right. So Laura, in that piece of that, and it kind of goes along with that, developing that love of reading. I often hear about, you know, kids have to read a certain book with a certain Lexile number, or whatever number that you want to distinguish it on. And I know you talk about the importance of letting kids self-select and why that's so important, even maybe if it's not on their level or above their level. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I sure can. First of all, self-selecting really develops students' agency, their literary tastes, because they try different books, especially when they hear their classmates talk about books. And it leads to independence. But you know, Kris and Carol, we also know that what you choose because you want to read it and it interests you is what will motivate and engage you. And we have to really learn to trust the children to do just that. Forcing a kid to read a book, they don't read it. They can pretend read. They can do all kinds of slippery things to get by. And having taught for as long as I have, I've seen every angle. And when a child tells me, you'll never make me read, I agree with them. I will never make them read. It has to come from inside. I can offer opportunities and hope that they will change. The other thing about Lexile, you know, it's not just Lexile that has to do with a book's level of difficulty, although a lot of teachers kind of grab onto that. It's really the concepts. And I can give a good example. The Giver by Lois Lowry is written on a 5th grade level, but I would never give it to a 5th grade child because it deals with euthanasia, you know, killing babies who are not born with perfect physical features, and older people. And it deals with sexual inhibitions. Well, we don't want 5th graders. I couldn't discuss that with graders. So it's a perfect book for 8th and 9th grade. And it doesn't matter that the reading might be easier. You're wrestling with issues and ideas that are challenging. So we have to be careful when teachers latch onto that. You know, it's only one element in matching a book. The other point I would bring out is think about your own life. Do you always read hard books? Don't you sometimes? I will tell you something that will make you laugh, because I love People magazine, but I don't love it enough to subscribe and pay for it. But my dentist subscribes to it. So when I have my 4-month dental appointment checkups, I go 20 minutes early so I can read People magazine. It's not going to hurt me. It's fun. And I think everybody needs that range of, sometimes I read an easy, fun book. Sometimes, because I'm so interested in this topic, I'll read a book that I have to work hard at.
Yeah, absolutely. And that motivation piece is so important. And it sounds to me like you're saying that, you know, we don't want our kids to have to read because we can't make them read. We want to motivate them to want to bring those books. And I too, Laura, have many guilty pleasures in reading. You know, I usually have about 3 or 4 books I'm reading at the same time. And one of them is always a kind of like, my wife looks at me like, what is that you're reading now? But it's like guilty pleasure.
Right. And we want the same for children. And And we know that choice, and choice for teachers as well, choice for you, Kris, and for you, Carol, even and myself, even though we work in administrative positions, it's key to making us want to come back every day and do a better job and work harder and help teachers and children. So I think we really need to respect children, even those who came into my first class. I will never forget it. I had a group, I was training 2 teachers, and I was the lead teacher in this class of 24 children reading at a K1 level in 5th grade. And they would pick out all the hardest books in the class library. And I remember one child telling me, but I can read 4 words on this page, and my heart broke. And, and I said, I think that's really, a beginning, but you want to read more than 4 words to understand the book. And so I gave that child 3 or 4 other books to look at. But, it took us 3 months to get those children to think about choosing a book that was what I call a good fit. And we all worked hard. We modeled, we chose books that we said were too hard, and then we couldn't read them. And we did all the things the kids do in front of them. And soon they began to talk about it and why. And sometimes we have to give children in that situation the gift of time, because once they start reading, the progress is huge.
I just want to jump in, Laura. Just speaking to a 3rd grade struggling reader this year that I've been working with. It's funny that you mentioned the student could only read 4 words, because one of my students happened to grab a book that he could only read a few words, same conversation. And here he is carrying this book he insists that he's going to read to the lit lab with me, so that we can read other books as well that are on level, but giving him, not knocking him down for choosing a book that's too hard, but instead we're empowering him. So this particular student that I have in mind has already jumped 8 reading levels. And now what we're doing, instead of saying, put that book away that's too hard for you, I'm still doing a reading lesson with him. And then I save the last 5 to 8 minutes of reading the book that he has self-selected. Let's read it together. Let's talk about it together. So we're still
wonderful, Carol. You never take a book away from a child, because the message is so negative. And we want to, your positive outlook just makes me warm all over, because that child knows that you respect his choice, but you're also trying to help him. And that message from the way you're working with that child will stay with that child a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, I just wonder if you have your classroom libraries and your students are self-selecting and you're exposing to them with these wonderful and rich texts, are you noticing that your students are reading outside of the classroom and talking to you about other books, or trying to get their hands on other books that are outside of what they need to do in class?
Yeah, absolutely. What we've done this year, because we are in such a unique situation, is we've put together book carts that are outside grade level spans, so that students can then take those books home. And we are not logging whether or not a student has taken a title. If the book comes back, fine. If it doesn't come back, that's okay too. We've put in a few initiatives. The other thing we've added is we actually got a bicycle with a basket and books donated to our school. And we, the staff around the whole building, we're pedaling our bicycle around the neighborhood, and kids who are working remotely are coming out and picking books from our basket. So we are increasing books in hands of kids, both at home and in the classroom.
What a wonderful idea. I might steal that in my district.
And yeah, it really works, Kris, because in Evan's school, which is a middle school, his librarian and a group of volunteers, parents and teachers, do just that. They go out into the rural areas and they deliver books. And the kids are waiting, jumping up and down, middle school kids. And you know, again, we know from research, I'm just going to throw this in. Originally in 1988, there was some research done that showed a very tight correlation between the amount of independent reading children did every day, and I'm talking about at school, and their development as readers, their achievement, their development of skills and strategies, and they would become better and better readers. But when the National Reading Panel disregarded that research because they said it wasn't done scientifically. But in 2004, Samuels and Wu, two university professors, did a scientific research and they got the exact same results. So we know that the best way to develop readers is through classroom libraries and independent reading. It's the practice that I think a lot of administrators understand that students need in soccer, in basketball, in football, in volleyball, to do well. Well, in reading, independent reading is the practice that kind of brings together everything students are learning in targeted instructional reading. And they're getting the practice with easy texts, and they're feeling that they're making progress, and they are.
Laura, just to piggyback on that a little bit, always that, and, Carol talked about it, the uniqueness of this year and not having our kids in front of us often, and they're, remote and hybrid and no matter where you are in this part of the country. But so when we get them in front of them, we want to give them so much information, right? We don't want to waste a minute, but we know the importance of these independent libraries and independent reading and giving them that time to do that. How do you see the classroom teacher's role if the children are independent reading? How does that play into all of that?
With remote learning, with virtual,
like if I'm an English teacher or a social studies teacher or whomever, and I have a classroom library and I want to give the students the opportunity each day to read 15 minutes a day in my class, but I only have 45 minutes. What am I doing, and what's my role in that? How do I make sure that I'm not wasting time and can get all the information I need to present to the students?
You're not wasting time. That's number one. I always recommend that you start that independent reading at the beginning of the class, because sometimes you get so involved in a discussion that the time kind of just disappears, and so does independent reading. With a 45-minute class, you might want to start off with 3 times a week so that you have 2 total class periods. I also tell teachers to think in terms of 2 weeks when planning their lessons, because ideally I like students, even in middle and high school, to have 50 to 60 minutes for just reading and writing about reading. And what the teacher does is, I think the teacher should read for 10 minutes. They might really, and show to the students, model how much they value reading and how reading is important to them. Or just before independent reading starts, you might hold up a book and say, I'm so glad we have independent reading now because I can read the next chapter, which I've been thinking about. To give them all the feelings that you were describing when you said you had 3 or 4 books going at once, that readers who love to read experience. But, independent reading, I have a list of 15 things it does, just to name a few things. It builds background knowledge, it builds vocabulary, it introduces students to all kinds of genres. They learn literary language. They develop agency because they have choices. And they develop stamina, the ability to concentrate for a long period of time without wiggling, squirming, going to the bathroom, going to get a drink. That in itself, just that stamina, that ability to focus, will transfer to other subjects. The other thing is that I think both you and Carol have alluded to is that if kids read in school every day, they're going to event and love it. They're going to decide to do it at home. And that's where you get that 65 minutes that Travis talked about. We're talking 15 to 20 minutes in school and another 15 to 20 minutes at home. it is the best thing. And, you know, with remote learning, I'm going to address that. And, you know, kids totally on virtual. I have recommended to teachers time and again that the one thing they do every day is engage kids in independent reading, and then put them in virtual rooms with partners or small groups and let them talk about their books. It doesn't matter that they're all different. Let them talk about what made the book, you know, wonderful for them. Was there a character? Was there new information? You can have a bunch of open-ended questions, but that is one of the best things that we can give children.
Yeah, Laura, and you just, as I start thinking about it and hearing you speak, and I agree, there's no better activity for a child to do than that independent reading. And, you know, we've struggled even before the pandemic, but certainly it's been amplified now with the social emotional needs of our kids. And, right. And something that I've promoted is, you know, taking a few minutes or even just a quick minute, 2 minute, 3 minute check-in and have individual conferences with kids, academic related or not academic, to see how they're doing. And, you know, it's a challenge for our teachers. How do I find that time if I've got 25 kids in my class or in each section or whatever it may be? And if I can do my 10 minutes of independent reading and then meet with 2 or 3 students, you know, each day to get that check-in, that's another strategy that this may be helpful for as well, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, the other thing is, I know that feeling as a teacher. I think you do, well, you all do, because, you know, even if you're no longer in the classroom, it's that you want to give them as much as you can, but sometimes that's not always the best. And especially with virtual learning, we want to be very selective. Because we can't cram all that information into their heads. It's very different than when you're there and in person, and they have peers supporting them in class. So, but independent reading, it never gets old. It's the best thing that we have students do.
How do you feel about reading logs, Laura and Carol?
Oh, okay. Do you want to go first, Carol?
Oh gosh, go ahead.
Okay, I do not believe that we ask kids to write about their reading. The logs that I have students keep are lists: title, author, date abandoned, or date completed. And every month students choose a book to do a book talk, or instead of a book talk, I might say, organize them in groups of 4 to 6. Pick a book on your book list that you would love somebody in your group to read, or you want to say, never read this book again. You never pick it up. So that's my feeling about independent reading. You do not have to grade everything. You do not have to have a project on everything. I remember the days when I was in school where you had to do a diorama on every book you read. And, you know, if you read a lot, you were punished because you had to do 10 times more dioramas than a kid who read 2 books if you read 7 books. I don't see that as a way to promote reading. I have to tell you that I was at a conference once and the teachers dragged their superintendent, Kris, up to speak to me and put me in a pretty tight situation because he had mandated that all the students in their middle school, 6, 7, and 8, had to read 30 minutes a night and write a summary in a journal that was graded. And the students said the teacher said after 6 weeks, many of the kids just said, give me an F, I'm not doing it. And the superintendent got really angry. So, and he's saying, I need accountability. And I was struggling in my mind to find a way to respond. And it just popped in. And I said to him, I'd like you to show me one of your journals. You don't live too far from where the conference is. Go home and get a journal and bring it back. I really want to see it. And he said, are you kidding? I don't keep a journal. I said, there's your answer.
There's your answer. That's so funny, Laura, because I was on the opposite side of that. I led an initiative here in my district in North Rockland where we no longer allow reading logs. And, I was asking, why the same arguments, the accountability and such. And I said, well, let's kind of do this exercise. It's June and it's the last day of school and you've gone with your family down to the beach and who likes to read? And you take out your favorite book and you see the sunset and everything you're reading. And then okay, now I want you to write about, which character was introduced and how many minutes you read, and you have to read 15 pages before, and then it kind of makes that point. But same kind of analogy there.
What happens is we become victims of the way we learned, and you have to break those paradigms of things that you did that because teaching and how kids learn depends on research, and this is an era of great research. And I always say it's evolutionary, it changes. But the most important thing is we teach the children sitting in front of us. And if those children can't read, we don't give them a book they can't read and read it out loud because they're not reading. What we have to do is work together, collaborate, and find ways to turn these children into readers. And it takes time and patience and Carol's very positive attitude to that young boy needs to transfer to every child that sits in a classroom in front of a teacher.
How do you incorporate it, Carol, into your teaching, the independent time? What does it look like specifically, in a regular ELA lesson or such?
What does it look like in the classroom?
Yeah, how is it structured? What time of the day? What is the teacher doing? Those sort of things.
So in our district, teachers have anywhere from 120 to 150 minutes for literacy. And typically, at least in this particular building, what most of our teachers are doing is they spend about 20 minutes of their literacy block on an interactive read aloud. And that's the part where I feel is the selling point, the part of the day where we can capture kids' attention. I'm sometimes considered the crazy book lady who comes in because I am extremely passionate about reading books. And when I read a book, I am fully invested in the entire experience. And so I am moving, I am loud. So that's the selling point. And that kind of speaks to the point where we were talking about what is the teacher doing? Well, the teacher is really showing kids about what books are, what type of genres there are. And then we, at some point during the day, of course, they have their independent reading block, but we also build in our 10-minute mini lessons. So there is a 10-minute block of time where the teacher is doing explicit teaching about reading. The rest of the time is independent reading or small group work. And it varies from classroom to classroom, whether it's AM or PM. But for the most part, that's the structure. And as far as speaking to your reading log question, what I find to be the most authentic for students is kids being able to see both adults and children talking about books, what books interest them, what books they don't like, what books they think somebody else should be reading. And this year, one of the things teachers have been using is Flipgrid. So one of my most engaged, I put it out to K through 6. The whole school just asked them, share with me on Flipgrid your most favorite book. And once I had kids' names entered into this Flipgrid, what I then did is auctioned off books. So as soon as I had a certain number of recipients, then I picked out, and you just won a free book. Highly engaging, but that's who sells books. When you have your own friends sitting next to you saying, you need to go off and read this book. That's how we're getting our students engaged.
Yeah,
that's great. It's great. And sometimes I have elevator talks. And middle school kids really like that, where you have 60 seconds to sell your book when you finish it. And whenever, there's no particular schedule. A student will come in and say, oh, Mrs. Robb, I finished my book. I got to have an elevator talk. Could you fit it in? And I will fit it in at some point during the class, and they get up. And you're right, there are takers. In fact, sometimes there's a list of students who also want to read that book, and they're telling the other kid, come on, finish it, we want our turn. And it's very exciting. All the same thing. Kids are the best advertisers. Once a child starts to love reading, it's almost like catching a cold. It spreads, you know.
Sometimes it's just one title, right? Or one book
Right.
that hooks them and they love. And that's why I think it's so important to expose them to different texts, to let them have options, to let them pick, you know, what they're going to be reading.